afternoon and welcome to today's Town Hall with leaders of the Presbyterian Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment, better known as MRTI, and the Church's Office of Faith-Based Investing and Corporate Engagement. Today's event is designed to give you a chance to ask MRTI leadership questions about recommendations it will be bringing to the 225th General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat on whatever platform you happen to be watching us on, and our production teammate Victoria will make sure we get them. But before we start, let's watch a quick video that explains how MRTI works.
What is MRTI? MRTI stands for the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment. Through MRTI, the Presbyterian Church pushes businesses to adopt practices that are not harmful to the environment, better for workers, prevent human trafficking, and more. These align with Presbyterian values and with how Christ calls us to take care of the world and each other. How does it work? MRTI is a committee created by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, whose members represent 6 GA-related entities. MRTI also has staff who handle most of the conversations conducted with businesses and their leadership. This is done through using the shares held in the portfolios of the Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions. Both of those agencies hold stock in companies to use the earnings to benefit the U.S.A. through funding retirement beneficiaries and funding important mission work. Holding stock in a company gives a shareholder the unique ability to bring attention to key issues. How does MRTI choose the companies? Companies are selected because these companies have practices or policies that are out of alignment with U.S.A. values. The investing agencies of the U.S.A. hold stock in the companies. We work in coalitions to join forces with other faith and values-based investors. Does it work? Yes. Often companies do change their practices. MRTI has a rigorous process for evaluating select companies, color-coding companies after thoroughly researching their business practices. MRTI actions have successfully moved companies in the right direction many times since it started in 1972. Here are a few examples. Helped bring pressure to end the apartheid regime in South Africa. Hotel chains and airlines have trained staff at all levels on how to spot and prevent human trafficking. Companies are committing to more transparency of their lobbying efforts related to climate change issues. What happens when it doesn't work? If a company doesn't respond to our letters, phone calls, and invitations to meet, MRTI may recommend that the agencies of the Presbyterian Church U.S.A. sell stock in the company and not buy any more stock in those companies. This is called divestment. This is an important tool, and it's the last tool of shareholder engagement. It is always our hope to influence corporations to be better actors for people and for the planet. When we walk away, we lose that influence. This may be warranted if companies make inadequate effort to change. But it is always our goal to cause lasting change in business practices that make a positive impact on people and planet. Want to know more? You can find more information on the MRTI website at presbyterianmission.org/MRTI.
Welcome back. Many thanks to Robin Davis, Secula, and the communication staff of the Presbyterian Foundation for that video, which sums up MRTI's process very well. Now I'd like to provide you with a little bit of background about what's going on. In January, MRTI did indeed vote to recommend that 5 corporations be added to the General Assembly's divestment/proscription list. Those 5 companies are Chevron, ExxonMobil, Marathon Petroleum, Phillips 66, and Valero Energy. In February, the Presbyterian Mission Agency Board approved MRTI's recommendation, which now moves to the General Assembly, which, as many of you know, will be meeting from June 18th to July 9th. The MRTI report has the support of PCUSA's primary investing agencies, the Presbyterian Foundation, and the Board of Pensions. And if this passes the GA, the recommendations can be implemented by both agencies. This is the largest divestment recommendation that MRTI has made since the 1980s, when the committee was focused on apartheid in South Africa. Now let's meet our guest. The first is the Reverend Carrie Allen, who is chair of MRTI. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Darla. Thanks for having us.
You are welcome. The next is Rob Four, who is Director of Faith-Based Investing and Corporate Engagement for Peace U.S.A. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Darla.
All right, our next guest is Katie Carter. She is Associate for Research Policy and Information for the Office of Faith-Based Investing and Corporate Engagement. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thanks, Darla.
You're welcome. We now have two additional guests. Anita Clements is Vice President and Managing Director of Investments for the Presbyterian Foundation. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you, Darla, and hello to everyone.
Good to have you. And our last guest is Don Walker. He is Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer for the Board of Pensions of the Peace USA. Welcome, Don.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Darla.
You're welcome. Just to remind all of our viewers, this is a town hall and we are taking questions, so feel free to submit those throughout the broadcast and we'll be sure to address them. I want to start out just by asking why the five companies that I mentioned earlier made it onto this divestment list. Can Rob address that?
Sure. Thanks, Darla. So to give a little bit of context, a little bit of history here, starting back in 2014, which was the 221st General Assembly, there was some grassroots advocacy from, I believe, 9 presbyteries that brought together an overture that requested that the investing agencies divest from fossil fuel companies. And after some debate at the 2014 Assembly, that referral, the 221st Assembly referred that particular item to MRTI for further study. And so MRTI did a rigorous policy deep dive between 2014 and 2016, and then came back to the 222nd General Assembly and said, we did a really thorough, robust review of the current existing environmental-related policies of the General Assembly, and the most recent of which was passed in 2008, and it was very comprehensive, a policy called the Power to Change. But one thing that policy lacked was any guidance to the investing agencies around owning fossil fuel stocks. So MRTI said, we need to ask the Assembly for additional policy guidance to fill that gap, which had been identified by MRTI. So in 2016, that's just what happened. MRTI was directed again and to basically develop a framework based on the kind of the goals of the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in 2015, the year before. That is trying to move companies' operations to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is keeping the average global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that happened in 2016. And then in 2018, MRTI came back to the Assembly saying, okay, here is the framework that we built out. And I'll invite my colleague Katie to talk about this more in a minute. To implement this policy that you told us to do in 2016. So here's the policy here's the implementation framework called the Guideline Metrics Framework, and not only that, but we also need you to name particular companies that are that you want us to focus our engagement on and apply to this set of metrics and this evaluation standard. So the Assembly did just that, and they affirmed. This is in 2018. The 223rd General Assembly affirmed the metrics framework and said, okay, we want to name 9 companies for MRTI to do focused engagement on over the next 2 years and come back with possible selected divestment recommendations. And those 9 companies were included in a list of companies that were 100 companies at the time. It's grown to 167 through an initiative called the Climate Action 100 Plus Initiative, where it's the largest coalition ever by investors to with a single goal in mind, which is to get the 167 biggest emitters, publicly traded emitters of greenhouse gases, to Paris compliance. And not the original 9 companies were on that list of focused engagement, and MRTI came back in 2020 actually with 3 companies named. It was Valero Energy, Marathon Petroleum, and ExxonMobil. And as we know, the 224th General Assembly in 2020 did not meet regularly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So MRTI had another 2 years of engagement to do before bringing back this recommendation, which includes those 3 companies from 2020 and adds Phillips 66 and Chevron Corporation. So I'll stop there and maybe invite my colleague Carrie Allen to talk a little bit about why or how MRTI made this decision to name these 5 companies.
So, there are a couple things I want to say, and that is that this decision for divestment is not the end of the work that we have to do as a church. That climate change is a crisis, an existential crisis, and that crisis continues regardless of the divestment, what happens with divestment. And so those are issues that we still, as a church, need to be responsive to. In terms of how we determined how to move forward with these companies, we have a very rigorous process of engagement that is an evaluation based on a set of guidelines metrics that Katie helped develop. The committee with Katie as the lead on developing that really looks at where companies are related to making changes to impact climate change, as well as how they've interacted with communities that are impacted by climate change. So what we did was we have been engaged with these companies, or tried to engage with the companies, because some of them haven't engaged with us. And then we have also, making sure that that they are making changes that align more with our values and with our policies as a denomination. And then we really did reach out to communities, frontline communities that are impacted by climate change and by other environmental racism, where these companies are. And we went and visited. We went to Detroit, where Marathon Petroleum has a. I'm blanking on what it's called. Rob, help me real quick. They
have a refinery there.
Refinery. And then, in Texas, in southern Louisiana, where we saw, the coastal erosion driving down a road that, Google said was still a road and is no longer a road because it's all water. And we spent time talking with those communities. I just have to add that part of that work was really being challenged by Fossil Free PC U.S.A. that we to do more engagement with, not just the corporate engagement, but also the engagement with communities that are impacted. And so we wanted to be responsive to that very fair critique. So that's how we landed on these particular companies for divestment this year.
Okay. So this was in no way a snap decision or an arbitrary decision that was made. This was something that occurred after a long process and a rigorous process.
Yes, thank you for that. It was a process that was over years, as Rob referenced, and it was definitely not. They were not snap decisions. And, I think it's part of our, it's one of the things that I think is, for a lot of people, is the most frustrating parts of being Presbyterian. We don't do those snap decisions, and everything has to happen through a committee. But the theology of that is an understanding that the Holy Spirit is involved in those conversations and leading us in these like communal discernment, and that in that opportunity to have that communal discernment over time, that this where the Spirit is, that's what our process is. That's what we see throughout our polity.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to move us along to our next question, and that is, what do you hope these companies will do as a result of being placed on the divestment list if the recommendation is indeed approved by a GA? Are these decisions something that the companies really pay attention to? What sort of difference can it make for these companies to be placed on the list? And I'll just open that up to anyone who would like to answer it.
So I'm gonna tag team with Rob on this.
Okay.
So the idea behind what placing on the divestment prescription list is to, we're advocating for to move the needle on climate change. Our focus is not on divestment per se. Our focus is on taking seriously this, the urgency of climate change. So divestment is not a goal. This is a tool that we're using in an attempt to move the needle on climate change. So companies can align with our priorities. They can make changes in their behavior that align with what our values and priorities are, and then they would come back on our list for investment. So there's an opportunity for them to make changes that would allow us to invest with them once again. In terms of the risk for them, I think what we have learned based on what some of the companies that we're recommending are placed on the divestment prescription list is that this being singled out in this way does provide a reputational risk that wouldn't happen in sort of like a categorical way. So this idea of being singled out as like bad actor, as a particular bad actor, I think it does, this will be an opportunity for us to see how that actually plays out. But the reputational risk is distinctive in that. I don't know if Rob wants to add any more.
Yeah, that was very well said, Carrie. And another way of saying what Carrie articulated is these companies fall under the way our policies think about divestment. There are kind of two categories. There's product and service based, and then there's conduct related. And conduct related kind of is set in motion by our divestment and strategy policy from 1984. It has seven steps or 7 criteria. And as Carrie mentioned, that divestment is not the goal. It's moving companies towards compliance with the General Assembly standards. So in a way, a divestment recommendation for MRTI is kind of admitting failure, saying we can't move the companies to an adequate place based on our engagement. So therefore, we think at this time, our engagement is not going to make a material amount of difference in moving those companies further towards compliance with the General Assembly standards. So. And as Carrie said, and so they go on the list, and then there is a process that MRTI goes on or implements that reviews those companies periodically to see if they have made changes to their whatever the behavior is. So if in some amount of time in the future, one or more of these companies is adequately managing their operations towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, then MRTI would make a recommendation to the General Assembly to take them off the list, and that would be something that we would celebrate, because that would mean those companies were moving, or managing operations towards alignment with the Presbyterian Church's values.
Excellent. You want to be influential. You want to see positive change. All right. Our next question has to do with the Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions. Can you explain how they figure into this process? Maybe that's a question for Don.
Hi there. Thanks, Darla. So we work closely with Rob and Katie and the rest of MRTI when it comes to divestment of the companies that are listed. And I think it's important to know that we really do at the Board of Pensions align ourselves with the MRTI process. So when MRTI advises the Board of Pensions of potential companies, we're already in conversation with our investment managers about those companies in all likelihood. And so that's how we work to press forward with the MRTI process and passing along the values of the Presbyterian Church.
And from the foundation's perspective, the foundation has historically always followed MRTI General Assembly guidelines. As Don explained, the Presbyterian Foundation has board members and staff, including myself, that sit on the MRTI committee. We join in on the conversations and are involved in that process. And as far as the MRTI recommendations, if this recommendation is approved at the General Assembly, the process includes going next to the foundation's board, where they would review it and discuss it. As I said, we've always historically followed these guidelines. If it's approved, it would simply be sent out. It would be put on our prohibited securities list, and that list would be given to the investment managers where they would be selling the stocks in the most prudent, expeditious way possible.
And Darla, just to piggyback on that, the Board of Pensions does something very similar with its investment committee and board to make sure that we're following the MRTI guidelines as far as divestment.
Okay. Thank you very much, Don, and thank you very much, Anita. We're going to move on to our next question, and it has to do with the urgency of the climate crisis. We're hearing more and more about more frequent storms and more intense storms, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And many people are worried about this. I am wondering, and many people are wondering, and I know you've heard this, well, okay, you're talking about 5 companies, you're talking about selective divestment. Why not just complete divestment? Can someone explain why that may not be prudent at this time?
So again, this is where I said that it can be frustrating to be Presbyterian, because we see what's happening in the world, and we want action right now. So the reality is that divestment, as we said, is one tool that we need to utilize in sort of having an impact on climate change. Climate change is going to be with us after we divest from these companies. If the General Assembly agrees with our recommendation and adopts this report. So regardless of what we do as a denomination, this is a crisis. And there are actions that can be taken in addition to divestment. The reason that we don't do the categorical divestment is, one, because of the way what Rob and I talked about related to the selective divestment, and that's the process. That's the Presbyterian process. So the process is that we're evaluating companies based on what our values are and based on what our policies say. And that then we hold the companies up against those and then make recommendations if they are not making progress or they don't align with those things. And we also give them the opportunity to do that, which is why it doesn't happen right away. and then come back, like, you know, and are you making any progress? Do we see this? So that's why we don't recommend categorical. We have not recommended categorical divestment. It's important to understand as well this year that, based on what you just heard from Don and from Anita, that if anyone wants to see divestment happen, it happens by way of the MRTI report. And that is really the only way that we will see categorical, or excuse me, that we will see divestment. So if that's a priority for folks, then that's really what has to happen at this assembly. Now, there are other overtures that have come forward, and Fossil Free Peace USA has an overture that really isn't directing the Board of Pension and the investing agencies, is not directing them, but it is talking about like these overall prophetic vision for what it is that we want to see, because there's no disagreement on the urgency of climate change. We've had some differences around, you know, what is the strategy that we use for responding to climate change. And that's where, you know, there are you know, legitimate disagreements about the strategy for climate change, and there are a lot of opinions about that. And I also recognize that you know, a lot of those really high emotional opinions are born from a place of seeing such destructive and catastrophic continued urgency of climate change, and we all feel very strongly about that. So it's just, what's the strategy, and this is what our strategy is this year. And so for folks who, like us, want to see us have an impact, this is the way. The MRTI report is the way to do that. And I hope that we leave this assembly with divestment, because other paths that others would like to see will not lead to divestment this year.
And to just piggyback on a little what Carrie was saying, I mean, she's exactly right. And what she brought up in the kind of the beginning to answer your question, Darla, is the whole idea of shareholder advocacy, engagement, and including divestment, which is, like, as we mentioned, kind of the last tool of shareholder engagement, is effective and can be very effective. One lever, one route to you know, addressing this, you know, the biggest problem probably of our lifetime, you know, the climate crisis. But it has its limits. It's not the only thing. I mean, we need, you know, we need demand side change. We need policy change. We need financing and insurance change. You know, all kinds of systemic change, and all across the economy to really comprehensively address climate change. But the question then becomes, okay, what can the Presbyterian Church actually do? What can we actually do here? And as Carrie said, selective divestment is the only way that we can move forward, because the divestment policy takes into account this kind of complicated ecosystem in which we live, that has to relate with the investing agencies, the Board of Pensions and the Foundation, that have their own boards, have their own sets of policies, and frankly laws that they have to that they're governed by. So we have to operate within that framework. And so the tension, the two things that we always have in mind when we make divestment recommendations are, as Carrie was kind of talking about, there's the social witness side, which is based on GA policy, which is very, very, very important. And the second side is the implementability. Can the investing agencies implement these recommendations and still be, you know, compliant with their fiduciary duty? So these are the two things that we always have to think about. And which is really the what I think is some of the genius of the structure of MRTI that the General Assembly set up over 50 years ago, saying we're going to bring all these parties to the table and have them be the part of the same conversation, so we can kind of balance these ideas against each other, so we and move forward.
All right, thank you very much, Rob. I would like to direct my next question to Katie. MRTI and Fossil Free USA recently penned an editorial that appeared on Unbound, an interactive journal of Christian social justice. And I'd like you to talk a little bit, Katie, about the significance of that editorial and just the overall synergy that we're seeing this year between MRTI and Fossil Free Peace USA.
Thanks, Darla. I'll let Carrie handle that one. She was actually one of the voices
Okay.
behind that op-ed. So
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, Abby Mohop and I authored that editorial together and worked together on that. And what I think the important thing to know is that we've always been aligned with this as a crisis. We have not always aligned on the strategy for how we approach it. And this year, we really are aligned on that strategy. And so the strategy and what the overall vision is, and seeing an impact in climate change, what that vision is. And so that was really us coming together to really say that this is an opportunity for us to pull one lever in this overall, kind of this multi-pronged strategy to impact climate change, to pull this, as Rob said, one lever, and that we will also respectively be continuing with the ways that we can impact change. So MRTI and continued shareholder engagement and other ways that we can sort of try to leverage corporations to impact change. That's our kind of lane. We stay in our lane. And Fossil Free Peace USA and all of the grassroots activities that they engage and continuing to do that. So I anticipate that this is not the end of the story. And divestment is not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end. So I was really excited to work with Abby on that, and so that synergy is born from shared values, shared Presbyterian values, shared theological values, and agreement on strategy.
Looking from the outside, it appears that there's been a great effort to make sure that many people have a seat at the table. How important is that?
If I may answer that one, Darla.
Sure.
We believe at MRTI and at the foundation, at the Board of Pensions, that it's very important that we continue to have that seat at the table. If the General Assembly does approve the divestment action of these 5 companies, it will leave some other energy companies in our portfolios. Those are the companies that we will be able to work with, as Rob explained earlier, as Carrie explained earlier. Sitting down with these companies, the engagement aspect is very important. Co-filing shareholder resolutions. All of these actions is paramount. As Carrie said, the story doesn't end here. That story will continue in hopes that end goal of changing that behavior of that company, of them helping to make the world a better place. That would be the end goal. And even if only one of those energy companies that are still held in the portfolio made a change, I would say that could perhaps be worth it.
Thank you, Anita. Don, would you like to elaborate on that?
I'd just like to point out that, yeah, Anita's absolutely right. And we've actually seen some companies that MRTI has dialogued with make significant change either in their reporting or in their approach to climate change. Maybe Rob or Katie would like to talk about that.
Well, I'd be happy to talk about what we would do next too. And, as Anita hinted, once some of these companies are out of our portfolio, we're going to be looking for other sectors to engage next year. And as Rob mentioned, the different levers of the demand side and the financiers of oil and gas companies, we're really going to be looking at some energy utility companies in the next year, as well as some transportation companies. So car manufacturers and airlines, those companies using a lot of energy, And we're also going to be looking at banks and insurers, so companies that are providing finances and insurance coverage for oil and gas projects. Those will be some of our focus areas in the coming years.
That's great to hear. Returning to the topic of the various different overtures that will be before the GA, we know that Fossil Free Peace USA has its own overture, but again, you all came together for the editorial that was printed in Unbound. So is there a way possibly for the overture that they are supporting to pass alongside MRTIs?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that one. So the MRTI report in PC Biz is ENV 10, and going to the Environmental Justice Committee, and the fossil free supported overture is actually from Hudson River Presbyterian, which is ENV 07. And based on the analysis that MRTI has done, and that Carrie mentioned in the op-ed that she co-authored, the way that is written is asking the assembly to do something different than what the MRTI report is asking to do, meaning they both can move forward together as long as they remain fundamentally unaltered. And the reason, a way to think about that is the Hudson River Presbyterian Overture ENV 07 is more aspirational in nature. It makes a call, makes an encouragement to the denomination, including the investment agencies and all other Presbyterians, to end their investments in fossil fuels. Whereas the MRTI report is talking about a very particular process for how these divestment regulations can be implemented by the investing agencies. So they're two different things. So that is really as Carrie kind of mentioned, that strategy is now aligned and can move forward together. And there are a couple other overtures, ENV 01, I believe, from Presbyterian of Arkansas, and ENV 08 from Mid-Kentucky Presbytery, that don't fit that description, that have an issue that are directing MRTI and or the Board of Pensions and Foundation to do something that is out of the kind of the policy framework that's been established. So those could not move forward alongside the MRTI report, meaning that the assembly would have to choose one or the other. But the Hudson River Presbytery ENV 07 and the MRTI report ENV 10 could potentially move forward together.
And if I can
Yes.
just add one more thing to that, because
Sure.
I participated in another workshop recently where Abby and I were talking about from Fossil Free Peace USA. We're really talking about like performative divestment, and so the assembly could make this recommendation, move forward with one of these other overtures and not have divestment. So with Mid-Kentucky, with Arkansas, and then it would thwart the actual practical implication of divestment. So MRTI report is the only way that we're going to get divestment. And so when you have these flashy headlines, and we've seen them with other denominations, where they've had this categorical divestment and they haven't divested. And so you've heard from, we've heard the Board of Pensions, the policy aligns where they actually will follow through with that divestment prescription list and will move forward with that. You heard what Anita said about how the foundation has moved forward. And so the opportunity to have that is actually is distinctive from a lot of what we've seen. And so, like someone was mentioning one of the large universities, and they've done this big splashy thing, and then when you look look at the details, it actually hasn't happened. And so the categorical kind of thing. And so while that sounds great, and it sounds it sounds great on a practical level, it's the impact is not there, which is another reason why the selective divestment has an opportunity to be a powerful tool in this battle against climate change.
Thank you very much, Carrie. We have a question from a viewer, so I'm going to toss it out there. It says, how does the MRTI report compare to the other divestment recommendations? And if you go on PC Biz, you will see that there are nearly a dozen items listed there, which could be overwhelming if you don't have time to read through quite that many. Rob, could you perhaps talk a little bit about how the MRTI report compares to the other divestment recommendations?
Sure. So the most important of which is that in order for the investing agencies, the Board of Pensions and Foundation, to implement divestment recommendations, two things have to happen. Number one, MRTI has got to make a recommendation per the divestment policy from 1984. So there's 7 criteria that I mentioned before. So that's number one. So that's been done. Number two, the General Assembly has to agree with that recommendation. And if that happens, then that meets the standards of the investing agency's implementation policies and processes, and that recommendation could be implemented, as Carrie said many times. So that's so the thing to think about against the other divestment overtures that are out there is, are those standards, are those two, is that standard met? Are those two criteria met? So with ENV 01, the press for Arkansas, it is actually asking the MRTI to add 200 companies from the Carbon Underground 200 to its divestment list. The problem there is that circumvents the MRTI process and the policy, which is, naming particular companies, going through a rigorous engagement, and going through an evaluation process. So if that were to pass, and the MRTI report didn't pass, then it would not meet that standard of an MRTI recommendation. So the investing agencies would not be able to implement it. With ENV 08, which is from Mid-Kentucky Presbyterian, the issue is it completely circumvents the MRTI process, doesn't even mention MRTI, and wants the Assembly to direct the Board of Pensions and Foundation to divest from fossil fuels, which again is not the process. The standard is it has to go through MRTI per the 84 policy, and then the GA has to agree. So that ends up with no divestment also. The Hudson River Press, as I mentioned earlier, it does not have a kind of an overly prescriptive directives, and it's again more of a aspirational statement that actually is commendatory towards MRTI, which of course we all appreciate. And it directs MRTI to do some things that it can do and has done and would be able to do. So again, the way to think about it is those two can kind of move forward together because they're not in conflict. But with the other two overtures I previously mentioned, the Assembly will have to pick either that overture or the MRTI report. They couldn't have both.
All right, thank you very much. Well, we have had a very good conversation today, and before we go, I kind of would like to just go around and ask for any final thoughts, starting with Rob.
Well, thank you for this, first of all, Darla. This has been great, and thank you to you and Rich and your colleagues in communications. It's always really wonderful to be able to speak about this work, and I'm just so grateful to all my colleagues here in the committee on MRTI for all the work they've done, especially in the last 4 years, but even longer than that. And this again is, we believe, the most rigorous and faithful response to what the 223rd General Assembly asked MRTI to do, and that's what we hope that the Environmental Justice Committee and the full Assembly sees, that this is that we did exactly what we asked, what was asked of us, and did it faithful to the policies and processes with rigorous evaluation. So.
All right, before we move on to the next person, we do have a last minute question here. It says, wouldn't a GA resolution directing MRTI to divest, wouldn't that supersede earlier resolutions?
That's an interesting question. So again, the MRTI operates in this kind of ecosystem of policies that are not only General Assembly policies, but there also are policies and processes from the investing agencies, which have their own set. With respect to investment policy implementation, the highest authority for each of those agencies is their board. So the board of the foundation, the board of pensions, that have set their own policies and processes. So it's really important to remember that MRTI recommendations have to meet those standards of the two investing agencies. And so the General Assembly really has to operate in that framework as well. So if you look at the Board of Pensions has a really fantastic prohibited securities policy. It's available on the website. It's also, I believe, EndNote 4 on the MRTI report and ENV 10 on PC Biz. And it states that in order for the board to implement a divestment recommendation, those two things have to happen. MRTI has to make a recommendation per the 84 policy. That's in the Board of Pensions policy. So that has the 7 criteria outlined and has the steps there. And then so MRTI has got to make that recommendation first. And then the second thing is that the General Assembly has to agree. So that really is the framework. And again, the General Assembly can pass whatever it wants to. The question is, can it be implemented by the investing agencies? And for divestment recommendations to be implemented, there's only one path, and it's MRTI recommendation per the 84 policy plus a GA Assembly agreement with those recommendations.
Okay.
So I just
Thank
want to
you.
add to, I'd like to add to, is that, we have a process that this process has been established that is a rigorous process for us to really engage our policy. So to engage everything that the commissioners come to the assemblies and gather together where the Holy Spirit is working and God is directing us as a denomination to go forward on this path, that we are using those policies then to engage with corporations and with companies so that they're aligned with what we've said through this whole process. And so part of the question, that's some of the theology of the way that we're structured polity-wise, and why we have these committees that and this structure of it's a republic structure of governance, where we have a process kind of representation that is nuanced by this understanding that the Lord alone is God of our conscience. And so it's and that's why I say, and you've heard me say multiple times, that I get on a practical level that it's really frustrating when things don't happen very, very quickly. But there's also a serious theological reason that we haven't that we don't have a polity that embraces that model, because that model could lead to, we could have a change every other year, or every 4 years. We could have, you want it this way one time, and then the next assembly another way another time, without a process that is without an engagement process that is not just MRTI engaging with corporations, but MRTI engaging and wrestling with our policies and with representation on MRTI that's very diverse, not just the Board of Pensions and the foundation, but also I am the representative from the Advocacy Committee for Women's Concerns, from Racial Equity Committee, from our Social Witness Policy Committee. So you've got these various areas of our advocacy and advisory arms of the denomination that are also engaging, so that there are multiple lenses that are coming to our conversation. So you've got all of those things that are taking place in our conversations. And what if we don't have this process, what we're just saying is that we're going to go with what the majority wants, this year. That's not engaging all of these processes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carrie. Now I'd like to open it back up to Don, Katie, and Anita, just to ask if you have final thoughts.
I'll just jump in real quick if that's okay.
Sure.
I think to Carrie's point, one of the powerful pieces of the MRTI process is that it is also an easy communication tool for us to use when we talk with our investment managers and our investment managers with the companies that they're interested in investing in. And I think that really is a way that we serve to continue to witness the spirit of the denomination in the investing agencies.
Thank you. Anita, anything from you?
Yes, I would just like to add that MRTI has faithfully executed the work that the General Assembly assigned to us with a huge amount of analysis, research, engagement, and now we have the recommended companies for divestment. This will impact the remaining energy companies that'll be held in the portfolios more than we realize. And that will also give us the greatest opportunity for change. Be the change you want to see.
Thank you so much. And Katie, I'll give you the final word.
Oh, I'd hate to follow Anita, but I would just say that, we've covered a lot of issues and ground today. If there are additional questions, we have created a GA resources page on the MRTI main webpage. So if there are additional questions about the guideline metrics, the divestment process, or these policies, they're all on that one page if there are additional questions. So,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our guests for your time today and for explaining this complicated issue. I want to wish you all well, and so go in peace and have a great afternoon and a great GA.